guys. This is Michelle Conceison. I'm from MTSU, and I'm tuning in from the Nashville area, which is the traditional lands of the Shawnee, Yuchi, and Eastern Band of Cherokee people. I'm here today to present to you about studying diversity in the music industry. It's a summary of some of the research that's come out over the last 5 years. There's been a lot going on, and we've all been very busy. And also a little bit of background in the history and recent history of studying diversity in music, both in academia and some of what's been going on in the industry itself. So I look forward to going through this with you. I have a few things to acknowledge, so let's get started.
It feels important to acknowledge at the start of this presentation that I am a white, cisgender, 46-year-old lesbian woman, a third-generation American born in Massachusetts, the youngest of 5, to a Catholic family. I attended a well-funded public high school and had the privilege of participating in many activities, including competitive athletics, band, theater, ballet, youth group, and school government. My school was 15 minutes from my house. I knew many people who graduated from college growing up. I held multiple jobs as a teenager that I got through family and friend connections. I attended elite colleges and hold multiple degrees. When I was outed at a young age, I lost everything, but I was able to rebuild in San Francisco. I fell into jobs in magazine publishing and advertising. I started a music company after attending a business school program focused on empowering women. I moved to Nashville to be in Music City. Everywhere I have lived, I have found jobs and clients relatively quickly. Why acknowledge these things? Because I'm a person with many privileges who is about to talk to you about overcoming adversity. Some would say that is inherently problematic, and I want to acknowledge that. But in times of upheaval, anyone can make a difference. It takes a lot of different people to create a critical mass for change, and every conversation is a step to the future. I've been told this topic has not been addressed at MIA recently. It feels like an important topic for us to discuss as music industry higher educators. So here we go. As educators, we are all busy with the best of intentions. We believe in lifelong learning and continue to educate ourselves so we can educate others. The paper I wrote is intended for those who want to know about recent research that has been done, but have been unable to keep up with the conversations and initiatives underway. A lot has been going on, and we certainly have had our hands full in the last couple years. I tried to highlight some studies conducted within the last 5 years and the mission-driven organizations committed to studying diversity in the music industry today. My hope, by attempting to summarize these studies, is to both draw attention to those studies and also to encourage collegial discussion. If you know of studies I'm missing, are aware of critical findings in the field, or beg to differ with how I've characterized any of the points I make here, please tell me. We always hope our writings will encourage dialogue, so new learning from dialogue can lead to improved ideas. The paper is not a complete literature review of studies in the music industry pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It presents some highlights of some studies. The paper covers research I did not do myself. This is very important. The incredible work I'm about to review is not my work, but the work of others, many, 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 many others. I've done my best to put direct quotes in quotations when the words and phrasing are not my own. Everything I've included in the paper and in this presentation is from studies that are published and available for free online, so they could be easily taught in a classroom setting. To best understand studies of the last 5 years, it felt important to familiarize myself with the predecessors of this work, so I could understand the recent studies in context of studies that had come before them. I do not go into this in great detail in the paper, but I will share a few highlights that are relevant, especially to us, the higher education music business faculty community. Like everything, research has come in waves, time frames when significant research was conducted with visibility. In 1976 to 1978, researchers focused on the variety of music reaching mainstream audiences, primarily reflecting pop music trends in the music industry from the 1940s through the 70s. While these studies were not about diversity as we define it today, this work did propose some frameworks that encourage reflection on how industry systems affect what music reaches consumers. From 1991 to about 1996, researchers re-examined the work of previous researchers, primarily focusing on A&R operating practices of major labels and the role independent labels or sub-labels owned by majors were playing in the rise of new genres, reaching mainstream audiences and reflecting more diverse artists. From 2008 to 2012, researchers focused extensively on gender presentation and gender representation, as well as globalization of access to music through digital platform adoption. 2018 to date, while previous studies were primarily conducted by academics and journalists, recent research has been more driven by music business sector trade organizations, nonprofits, or industry organizations partnering with academics based on a shared perception of a diversity crisis in the music industry. Some studies have been prompted by specific events or through strategic initiatives. For example, prior to the event of George Floyd being killed by police in 2020, most research focused on gender disparity. After George Floyd's passing and increased cultural reckoning around systemic racism, more studies have included race and ethnicity. There is one exception, in that an academic named Alan Wells published on these issues throughout his career much earlier than the rest of the industry. While there are some reasons for pause in some of his findings, it is interesting to observe the timing of the topics he covered. That in and of itself is probably a whole other presentation. Before I highlight some of the novel findings from recent research, I want to share a few things I noticed in the process of researching this paper. These are my biggest observations regarding the research itself. The way the word diversity is used in the music industry has changed. That change is relatively recent and evolving. In some cases, we still experience ambiguity around what a person means when they use the word diversity. We know they mean a lot of people or things that are different from each other, but it is often used as a code word. Studying music industry diversity 30 years ago was very different from what it is today. While one might say that is a sign of progress, from a research perspective, it is challenging. It means we are still in the benchmark setting stage with respect to measuring representation of women and non-binary gendered folks, LGBT plus folks, people of color, and those living with disabilities. We are still documenting and establishing the state of our diversity crisis in the music industry, which is just the first stage of research. Academia's relationship with the music industry has changed. This is a very good thing for music industry diversity researchers. At one time, research was conducted from afar without participation of music industry professionals. In fact, in some cases, industry had disdain for research that was done. Now, in many cases, the research is coming from the industry with academics invited to participate to provide an added layer of rigor and objectivity. This is partially happening because a lot more educators are active participants in the industry now and have personal professional connections. While not true of all institutions, it is true in many places that academia has been more accepting of industry practitioners in the classroom, with current knowledge being a valuable asset. It is also happening because the industry has been made more transparent through invention of the internet. Mass adoption of social media and networking sites have made it easier to identify and contact leaders at all levels. In short, just as artists have become more directly accessible to fans, the industry has become more directly accessible to researchers. Finally, the third thing that is clear is there is real momentum for change across the industry on a global scale. Research studies are not just coming from the United States, they are coming from Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, France, Portugal, South Africa, Japan, and beyond. We're seeing research start to be studied beyond the top of the industry pop charts in Billboard alone. While my paper speaks most about the research that has been done in country and electronic music, it is expected we will continue to see more studies from other genres that will lead to deeper understanding of the music industry as a whole. So, benchmarks are being set, more studies are being repeated or share methodology with others in order to compare results and detect progress or lack thereof. And stories are being told. More studies are including capture of qualitative data, stories and experiences from directly inside the industry to explore what can be done to change the systems of hierarchy and exclusion that are in place. If I were to characterize what is being learned across all of the studies reviewed as an overall continued trend of exclusion, with hopes new efforts will make a difference. There is complete exclusion of some identities. Studies are not only starting to measure gender-expansive identities, there is little representation of out LGBT plus artists and visibility of people living with disabilities. Across all studies, representation of people who are Black, Indigenous, and of color, representing other non-white races and ethnicities, ranged from 2 to 4% depending on the area of the industry. Across all studies, representation of women, primarily white, seemed to be affected by spoken and unspoken quotas. The notion of "we have one already" came up again and again in studies, that including one woman was enough inclusion was standing in the way of more inclusion. Naturally, with that mentality prevailing in the industry, most studies found a range of somewhere between 15 to 20% representation of women. Multiple studies looked specifically at the producer and songwriter roles and identified between 2 to 5% representation, and even lower representation of BIPOC and other forms of diversity. Even though programs have been in effect for a few years to try to change this, the statistic continues to haunt us, and we must do more to encourage and promote our students who are aiming to pursue these careers. Please allow me next to share with you some of the organizations doing research and what they are finding so far. While the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California was founded in 1971, the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative at USC was founded by Dr. Stacy L. Smith in Los Angeles in 2005. By my counting, from 2006 to date, they have released 53 studies that are available to the public related to DEI. I'm sure behind the scenes there are maybe more, but all of these studies are available on their website. Their early work was dedicated to studying gender in film and television, and that work has continued consistently every year. They have taken an approach to establishing benchmarks and follow up on the same metrics while expanding their work into kindred new areas of study. In 2018, their first study of the music industry was called Inclusion in the Recording Studio, ? And focused on gender representation among recording producers and engineers. The most recent study published in June 2021 from AAI, Inclusion in the Music Business, Gender and Race Ethnicity Across Executives, Artists, and Talent Teams, studies gender and race ethnicity diversity among executives in the music industry. At the CEO president level, 86.1% of top executives were men and 86.1% were white. At the 9 major music companies, 100% of top executives were white and only 1 was female. They also looked at executive boards by company type and found that music groups were faring the best, radio and streaming companies were in the middle, and live concert companies had the lowest percentage of underrepresented executives at 12.5%, and no Black executives, but the highest percentage of women in leadership roles at 40.6%. Just prior to that June study, in March 2021, they released their latest Inclusion in the Recording Studio. This edition was done with funding and support from Spotify. Using Billboard's year-end Hot 100 chart data from 2012 to 2020, they found that women are underrepresented across 3 roles of focus: artists at 21.6%, songwriters at 12.6%, and producers at 2.6%. A few trends worth noting: among artists, women were most represented in pop music and least represented in hip hop and rap. Most women were solo artists, not in bands or duos, a trend noted across women of all races and ethnicities. Representation of artists of color is on the rise. Exclusion of women songwriters has increased, with 2020 being the worst year. Women songwriters appeared most in dance, electronic, or pop, and were least represented in hip-hop, rap, R&B, country, and alternative music. The study showed no progress for women in production. In fact, it showed decline from 2020 to 2019. In a 9-year period looking at the top 5 categories, they found only 13.4 of individuals nominated for Grammy were women. But there has been recent progress. In 2021, women reached a high with 28.1% of nominations. 61.5% of those women nominated, however, during the time period were white. Best New Artist and Song of the Year were the strongest for women. Women are less likely to be nominated for Record of the Year or Album of the Year, and only 1 woman was nominated for Producer of the Year during the time frame of this study, Linda Perry. One area I see for further study would be the rate at which Best New Artist nominees proceed to be nominated in other categories, not just at the Grammys, but across awards shows and different music genres. I suspect the diversity of new artists is higher than the rest of categories, and that diversity all but drops off by the time you get to Entertainer of the Year, Artist of the Year, Album of the Year, depending on the awards program you are reviewing. Both studies offered recommendations for the music industry to examine how its decision-making practices and beliefs perpetuate underrepresentation, that music companies need to go beyond performatism. And on screen now you'll see a series of highlights of those recommendations. They suggest that recruitment without corporate culture change may attract employees who represent diversity, but they will be set up for failure. They pointed out the impossible challenge diversity candidates have, especially if they do not exhibit behaviors that are consistent with prevailing white male-dominant focused culture. Among limitations of the study, AII noted that looking at genres other than the most popular from a mass audience perspective might reveal different results. Perhaps the Grammys showed improvement in their study because that data included categories beyond mainstream music genres. I wonder if studying mainstream music represents a majority experience in the music industry. It is a very large industry with many genres and sub-communities after all. Another recent study is one conducted by Berklee College of Music and the organization Women in Music. This was done in follow-up to previous studies by Women in Music Canada, and a later study I'll talk about after this was done in follow-up to this one. This one in 2019 was a survey-based study. Women cited active issues in the music industry pertaining to gender bias, racism, unfair compensation, work-life balance, and restrained career advancement. 84% reported being treated differently based on their gender. 68% said gender affected their employment. Women of color were more likely to feel they should be further ahead in their careers, and they were less likely to be satisfied with their primary occupation. Women of color were more likely to be in entry-level positions, while white women were more likely to be in senior positions. Over half work more than one job. 25% hold 3 or more jobs. This study addressed work-life and family issues as well. Women from higher income ranges were more likely to have children. 61% of women said their careers were a factor in their decision to have children. Interestingly, even though so many women cited many challenges, still 72% of women said they were extremely or somewhat satisfied by their job. The study confirmed that income does play a role in satisfaction. 65% of women in lower income levels expressed satisfaction compared to 86% in the higher income levels. The study considered ageism and racism as factors in job satisfaction as well. Women over 50 years of age were more likely to feel comfortable in the workplace at 83%, than women ages 18 to 24, 73%. White women were more likely to feel comfortable, 79%, compared with women of color, 72%. Women between the ages of 18 and 24 were more likely to feel supported at work, 71%. Women in their 40s were least likely to feel supported, 59%. White women were likely to feel supported, 66%, compared with women of color, 58%. Regarding strategies to overcome barriers and improve inclusion, over half of respondents offered recommendations, which included mentorship, internships, and networking. While so many who had mentorship said it helped their career, only 61% said they had been mentored. While so many said internships had helped their career, only 54% of women said they'd had music-related internship. So the call to action is clear in terms of services Women in Music will provide to their members. But as ANNENBERG identified earlier, this work must extend beyond the support organizations focused on women and permeate corporations across music to evolve a new music industry culture. The follow-up to that study was done by Berklee in partnership with the Recording Academy and Arizona State University. Results were just announced this March, and a lot of folks are still campaigning on social media and in articles using these statistics. Findings were similar to the study done a few years earlier, indicating slight shifts but no major changes in the industry. There were some differences in response to the new study, respondents being themselves more diverse. While 77% of the earlier survey identified as white, 59% of responses to this new study identified as white. Response rate by Black professionals was 10% higher than in 2019. This in and of itself might be an indicator of meaningful change and who is networked in the music industry. This study is one of the few being first to acknowledge gender expansive identities, including non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, and agender people being 3% of respondents. 91% said music industry was their primary job. 52% 7% having 2 or more jobs, 28% are working over 50 hours a week, and that was a new statistic being captured in this follow-up of the study. There were a couple statistics that were quite different. One is that 47% felt they should be further in their careers, which is down from 84% in 2019, and 56 said gender had affected their employment in the industry, which is down from 68% in 2019. There was still a high level of job satisfaction in the previous study. Over 81% of women surveyed said they did not have children. In comparison, just for comparison's sake, according to the most recent report from the CDC on this metric in 2019, 44.8, about 45% of women aged 15 to 49 had not had children. So 81% in the music industry is significant. Women at all levels expressed emphatically that their career had an effect on the decision to have children. While this seems obvious to me as a woman in business, seeing it in the study is hard to take in. The notion that so many people's families are affected by participation in the music industry really hits home, that it's not just a personal choice, it's a collective and systemic one. The report identified a level of skepticism among respondents when it comes to the effectiveness of programs across the industry that intend to uplift historically marginalized communities. The study sets up a framework of measures or action items, means that should be employed to address the list of categories ends in order to effectively make change. You can see these goals and how they suggest these goals be achieved here on screen. While Women in Mix is the Recording Academy's most recent research, it's not the only work they have done regarding diversity. The Recording Academy is striving to walk its talk and lead by example in initiatives around voting membership, recruitment, and revisiting the awards show broadcast to rethink the ways it's always been done in the past and how things could change. It was 2018 at the 90th Academy Awards when Frances McDormand asked women to stand up and accept her Oscar with her. For most Americans and for many in the entertainment industries, her acceptance speech was the first time they heard the words inclusion writer. 4 years later, we just experienced a 2022 Grammy Awards show that operated with an inclusion writer, issued late last year by the Recording Academy in conjunction with The Color of Change and Cohen, Milstein, Sillars, and Toll as part of the Change Music Initiative. An 8-page inclusion writer. It has 9 main sections. It outlines the reasons the rider is necessary and speaks to the dynamics of systemic prejudice that leads to underrepresentation in all facets of the music industry, and attests to the Recording Academy's intention to use the rider for all broadcasts. It introduces a notion that on-stage positions and off-stage positions alike are equally in need of more diversity, and within the on-stage positions pays particular attention not to just performers and hosts, but also announcers. Looking more at the independent music scene, in 2021, Medea, a UK-based research and market intelligence firm, teamed up with digital distributors TuneCore and Believe on a study called Be the Change, Women Making Music. The study primarily analyzed results of a survey circulated in February 2021, as well as in-depth qualitative interviews. 93% of women surveyed reported having to put up with more difficulties and challenges than men. 81% felt it is harder for female artists to get recognition than male artists. Among the genres that have had studies specifically of their fields, country and electronic music are prominent, and their studies unpack more of the dynamics expressed in the Medea study. Sometimes significant events spark an increase in research activity. It helps to see some of these studies in context with why they may have happened in that time. For example, Frances McDormand's speech mentioned previously happened 1 month before Neil Portnow's unfortunate step up comment at the Grammys. 6 months after the New York Times broke news about Harvey Weinstein, sexual harassment and assault, and less than 6 months after Alyssa Milano popularized the Me Too hashtag on Twitter, though that movement started in 2006. The Recording Academy's attention to DEI was in many ways sparked by that difficult moment in Grammy history. It's no surprise that an inclusion rider would be among the first actions they might take to remedy, repair, and strive to do better. In country music, the shot heard round the world came in the form of public remarks from a radio consultant that tipped off a series of efforts to improve diversity in the genre. At Country Radio Seminar, CMS, it was a session entitled Unlocking the Secrets of Successful Music Scheduling, when consultant Keith Hill compared radio to a salad, with women as tomatoes and men as the lettuce. He suggested to boost ratings, women should be played infrequently for added color but not be the substance, never be played back to back, and he claimed that the listening audience of country music that women want to hear males. In follow-up interviews over the following 2 months, Hill continued to stand by his recommendations, further expanding on his rationale for proactively limiting the number of women artists played in country radio. While this pattern of scheduling and attitude from radio decision makers was regularly experienced by women, no one in radio had gone so blatantly on the record about it to date, and this event sparked open dialogue and debate across the country industry. Artists had their ways of responding, which you'll see here. Their participation in public dialogue certainly raised awareness. This controversy would come to be known as Tomatogate or Saladgate by many. Sarah Evans' comment preceding what you see on screen here was, "I'm really glad Keith made that statement because we women of country music have been talking about and dealing with this for the past 5 to 7 years, and I don't really know what happened," she said. As a female artist, we have seen it get harder and harder to get played on the radio, almost to the point that we feel that we have no genre anymore. They just will not play women. It's so ridiculous. Perhaps in part because the radio consultant claimed to be speaking from credible research he conducted, advocates for women in country music responded with data. In turn, that drew more players into the field of diversity research in country music specifically. From 2016 to 2020, several studies were published about diversity in country music. In the paper, I review research efforts made in country music by Beverly Keel and Change the Conversation, Devarati Ghosh, Leslie Fram, and CMT. Coleman Insights, Annenberg dipped their toe in, as well as deep research done most recently by Jada Watson and Song Data. In February 2020, CMT launched a campaign called Equal Play that both cast a spotlight on studies about country radio and invested in new work, further spreading the word in the country music industry and beyond. A Coleman study done in partnership with CMT surveyed radio listeners who favored country. It proved that 72% of fans are aware men get more airplay, and 84% of listeners said they wanted equal play for female artists. 28% of those surveyed said they would listen more if they did. Annenberg had recently done a study using the same methodology applied in their other research in country and compared results. They found only 16% of artists in the chart were women. They also found the average age of the top male solo artist was 42, and it was 29 for women. Only 15% of nominees for the top ACM categories were women. Only 2 women were nominated for Entertainer of the Year, and only 12% of songwriters nominated were women. 2 women. In a period of 3 years, Song Data, led by University of Ottawa researcher and educator Jada Watson, put out several reports, 3 in consultation with Woman Nashville and 4 independently. These were from country format radio's weekly and year-end reports as tracked by Mediabase. For CMT's initiative, Song Data published a report that, quote, advanced an intersectional framework to focus on radio programming in 2019 and demonstrated the cyclic relationship between radio programming, chart activity, streaming algorithms, and nominations for CMA awards within the industry. This report leveraged data from both Mediabase and Billboard charts. Every way Song Data looked at it, quote, women occupy significantly less space than men in country music, and it has gotten worse in recent years. While the late 1990s were strong for women artists in country, the overall trend has been decline in visibility and commercial country radio success. 10% fewer women debuting and 27% fewer reaching number 1. Whenever female artists have had a peak year, it has been followed by immediate drops of 20% or more. Song Data's 2021 research expanded their study to look at race and ethnicity in country music, released in a report entitled Redlining in Country Music in March of that year. The 2021 report paints a picture of minimal airplay for BIPOC artists, under 4% in most recent years. Of the 2.5% of airplay BIPOC artists received in a 19-year period overall, 96% of that airplay was for men, suggesting, quote, a racial hierarchy exists. In 19 years, only 13 Black artists and 3 Black women appeared in the dataset. When looking at spins by day part, most airplay for BIPOC artists happen in evenings and overnights, which the research has described as redlining, a reference to real estate practices that obstruct people of color from purchasing homes in neighborhoods dominated by white people. Country music is not the only genre to dig deeper and research their community specifically. An ongoing project in live electronic music, the FACT survey, has been published 5 times, first in 2013, then updated in 2015, 17, 20, 20 and now 22. The authors' names are anonymous. They refer to themselves in the report and related documentation as the female pressure troublemakers. They gather data they analyze from female pressure members and festival organizers. Theirs is the only report I read other than the Recording Academy and Song Data's recent works that included a methodology for non-binary gender inclusion. Theirs was also the only study, other than one from Australia I speak to later, that painted a picture of progress for women over time. This is positive change, and it bears further exploration. Is more change being made in the live sector than at radio? Is this trend more specific to the culture of electronic music as compared with country and other genres? Does the fact that this study is international play a role, suggesting that events in other countries might be presenting more women than in the US? As more genres produce studies, we stand to gain a lot of valuable knowledge about possible solutions. In addition to formal research, there are a lot of advocacy initiatives coming together. In her book, Emergent Strategies, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, Adrienne Marie Brown describes organizing for change like murmuring of birds, that all birds move individually but together and provide cues to others about taking turns, shifting direction, and making progress on the journey. These are just a few examples that might inspire your students, and all are moving in their own spaces at once together. Some have a goal of awareness. Book More Women started on Instagram as a way to graphically depict the way women are excluded from festival bookings. Black Opry is an organization creating awareness about just how many Black artists are in roots music, a direct answer to promoters and music industry people who say they don't know how to find diverse artists. Further to that cause, several databases have been created to help people find diverse talent and professionals in the industry. These too are across music genres, but some genres also have their own databases. Finally, several pledge initiatives are underway. Music industry professionals and artists make pledges to hire folks from underrepresented groups and then report back on how they are progressing. Key Change was founded by the UK performing rights organization PRS. Promoters take the Key Change pledge to achieve gender balance in their programming and presenting work. The Women in the Mix pledge was created by the Recording Academy in light of the first Annenberg report findings, getting producers, artists, and other recording decision makers to pledge to consider women in engineering and production roles. While the Key Change pledge reports significant impact in live music across the world, the Annenberg study suggested the Women in the Mix pledge might not be having the same traction. In the classroom, Book More Women is a very easy and visual way to share the issue of gender disparity in festival presenting with students. It allows for conversation not only of how many women are booked, but how they are billed and where they appear. And often the festivals Book More Women is covering are festivals our students attend or want to attend. There are many initiatives happening in the UK and Ireland. Studies have come out from the UK Music, Vic Bain, and Why Not Her. Attitude is Everything is an organization focused on disability rights and access to live music, both for audiences and for artists living with disabilities. They have published several reports on best practices and advice for presenters in the industry and are an excellent early resource if you would like to discuss disability rights in the classroom. Students might get into the idea of diversity being a social movement. Research isn't just research anymore. It's got marketing campaigns and social graphics, and it can activate real change. In just the last few months, Canadian organizations have been very active issuing new studies. A lot of focus of these studies have been about anti-Black racism and exclusion of Indigenous creators in particular. I encourage you to read these studies in full, and I will provide links to all studies in my paper for further reading. A major contribution of the SEMA and Breakdown Barriers study, which was initially reviewed internally in July 2021, but only just recently presented publicly in February 2022, is the notion that using the word diversity is a euphemism that is a way out for people who are uncomfortable referring to racism directly. It focused specifically on anti-Black racism and contends that by lumping all intersectional issues together in research and in activities, we do none of the individual identities justice. This study was conducted differently from others I read, as it was done entirely qualitatively and gathered its key learnings from a series of roundtable discussions. The Canadian Live Music Association's report was published during the writing of this paper and is evident how frequently new information is available on the topic. The full report is 102 pages of book, and I encourage you to read it. It educates on topics from racism to tokenism to, quote, The Problem with Genre Classifications. It covers challenges immigrants and descendants of immigrants face in live music, emotional labor, gatekeeping, power dynamics in funding systems, imposter syndrome, adopted whiteness, imposed whiteness, ways privilege comes to bear in live music, decolonization of funding, and other relevant topics in diversity, equity, and inclusion not always covered in music industry research reports to date. The full report includes stories of specific communities, cultural practices, and events that have led to exclusion as examples to help the readers see, understand, and apply the findings in their own organizations. Major Australian radio station Triple J released reports compiled by Angie McCormick for the program Hack from 2018 to 2020. Entitled By the Numbers, the reports focused on women in Australian music. Like the electronic music study, McCormick's most recent report showed progress. She used census data to gather that not 29% of those who reported music professional as their job were women. 1 in 5 songwriters were women. Almost every festival studied showed improvement since their first report, though none of these statistics, it should be noted, are equity. In awards, women were still underrepresented. Percentage of board members and roles at indie labels improved, while artist managers held about the same. But as with all studies, the biggest finding was there is more work to be done. So what does that work look like then? On the road ahead, we must go deeper to analyze genres and subcultures in our industry so we can learn more from areas where equity has been more possible. Cooperate with industry organizations and professionals to ensure quality of research methodologies. Incorporate new media into our work, gathering more qualitative stories to get beyond euphemisms and face hard truths. And continue to define what metrics are strong indicators and set benchmarks for accountability and progress. Thank you for watching this video. If you've watched this far, that's great. I look forward to Q&A and discussion in the panel during the conference. I'll see you soon.